Hey there, Professor Renee here. And so I am here to talk to you a little bit more about soldier versus scout mindset. That's something that we did last week. And then we're going to move on to Bloom's taxonomy, which is a good structure for critical thinking. And then finally, we'll go through a critical exercise activity together. And so to get started, last week, y'all listened or watched a TED Talk with Julia Galef, and she discussed the difference between a soldier mindset and a scout mindset. And you guys participated in an assignment where you kind of reflected on that. But here I have a table that kind of outlines the differences between the soldier and the scout mindset. So if you need to, go ahead and pause the video. You can kind of look through there. But what I want you to be thinking about here is I want you to be thinking about the Perry model that you read about last week. So what connections can you make between what Galef has described in her soldier versus scout mindset and then what you read or watched on the Perry model? And so moving on, I want to talk to you guys a little bit about Bloom's taxonomy. It is a structure for critical thinking. And because I like to give you kind of the why are we talking about this, who invented it, I do want to talk a little bit about it, the creator, Benjamin Bloom. This is not something you need to write down. You won't be quizzed on it. However, I like you to know who he is because when we're evaluating, what he's done, I want you to know that, he does kind of have the credentials to back up what he's saying. So Benjamin Bloom, you can see here, was born in 1913 and passed away in 1999. And he was a teacher, a thinker, and an inventor. He worked at the University of Chicago, and he was president of the American Educational Research Association. The University of Chicago is a pretty prestigious university. And he went through over his time there and his time, as a teacher and a thinker. And he created a list about how we think about thinking. So this is kind of metacognition, why are we thinking what we're thinking, but also is there a thinking process that we can go through that helps with our critical thinking? And so Bloom's taxonomy is really just a chart of ideas. It gets his name, Bloom's. Obviously, he was the creator, so he gets his name there. And then a taxonomy is an arrangement of ideas or just a way to group things together. So that's why it's called a taxonomy. And it has evolved since Benjamin Bloom's creation of it. It used to use nouns for each of the categories, but now it actually uses action words, which I believe is a little bit better. And those action words kind of describe the cognitive processes that thinkers encounter and work with knowledge rather than nouns that label the categories. And so here is a quick overview of Bloom's taxonomy. And one thing I do want you to note here is that there's basically two main components to critical thinking. So here we have a taxonomy that has 6 different levels. But what you'll see here is we do have a lower level and then we have a higher level. And so these lower levels, these are kind of our lower level critical thinking, or not critical thinking, these are our lower level thinking skills. We don't use a whole lot of critical thinking in these bottom levels. And then as we get into the top 3, these are our higher level thinking strategies that we use. And so the reason why we use these lower level thinking categories here is because this is how we gather information. So when we're doing things like remembering, understanding, and applying, we're really gathering information so that we can move up into these higher levels of critical thinking. And so we use those to guide our critical thinking behaviors. And so critically thinking about a set of facts or other information order to make an informed decision really requires you or us as thinkers to go through these 6 levels of Bloom's taxonomy. One of the things that I want to be very clear on, and this is something you definitely need to know, so please make a note of this, is that we use these different levels of Bloom's taxonomy, but we always have to start at the bottom and move our way to the top. We can't skip levels. If we skip levels, that will interfere with our ability to critically think. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as we move on. But just remember, you always have to start at the bottom, kind of like a pyramid. If you pull out the bottom, it may topple down. So you always have to go through each of these stages sequentially in order. And so what Bloom's taxonomy really does is it helps us put things in perspective by gathering that information first. It really helps us be better informed when we're actually going through the analyzing, evaluating, and creating stage. It ensures that our decisions are informed because there is an analysis and reflection taking place. And finally, that information gathering stage is one of those things that can free you from past assumptions or preconceived notions, some self-doubt. So in a couple of your discussions, I made comments about, and you all made comments too, like, how do we get past like our preconceived notions, the things we think we know? How do we get past those and really listen to others and affirm whether or not those preconceived notions are correct? And so Bloom's taxonomy is a great tool to help us do that. And so what I want to do is I want to go through each of the stages in order. We're going to start with remembering, and then we'll move to understanding, applying, and then get up to those higher level critical thinking skills of analyzing, evaluating, and creating. So our first stage is remembering and knowledge. This is at the very bottom of Bloom's taxonomy, and it's key to be able to remember things. This is our first and most basic level of questioning. When we are in this stage, we are doing things like describing, naming, listing, relating, finding, to really kind of define what we're doing at this level. This level, although extremely important, does not really use critical thinking. It's more of an input-output. If you think about Jeopardy, when people are answering, or trivia, just answering random trivia questions, all that is remembering and knowledge. We remember it and we spit it back out. We don't really have to understand what we're remembering, we just have to remember it. Okay, so at this level, we're going to be asking a lot of questions as critical thinkers. So at this level, we can ask questions like, what is the issue? What is the author's conclusion? What are his or her reasons? Who is this about? Where is this taking place? When did this take place? Okay, moving on to our second level, we have understanding and comprehension. So this level does require a little bit more thinking power than just our knowledge or remembering stage. What this is where we begin to understand the meaning behind what a person is saying, the meaning behind what an author is writing. So we're using words like understanding the meaning, translation, interpolation, interpretation of instructions and problems. This is where you would summarize or state a problem in your own words. Questions we can ask at this level is, how would you classify this issue? How would you compare this issue to another? What facts or ideas, what are they showing? What's the main idea? What supports this? What is the author saying? Summarize what the author is saying. And finally, our last level in those lower order information gathering stages is applying. And what this is this is where you're going to begin to use information that you understood to begin to solve problems. So although we really aren't in our critical thinking stages yet, we are using some higher order thinking skills. When you are applying information, you're taking one information and you are using it in a new situation. You might be using methods, concepts, theories in new situations. And some questions that we can use to guide us at this level are questions like, how would you use blank? What examples can you find? How would you organize the author's points to show that he, understands his conclusion? What approach would you use to blank? What would result if this next thing happened? And so those three, as we've kind of talked about, those three really make up these bottom levels. Again, this is where we're information gathering. Okay, and so now what we're going to do is we're going to move up and we're going to kind of discuss these upper levels of critical thinking. And so our next stage is analyzing. So what is analyzing? This is where the critical thinking really begins. This is where you begin to draw conclusions. Words like examine, investigate, why are we analyzing this, kind of describe the behavior. So this is where you're starting to see patterns. How does this issue relate to this? Or if we change the issue a little bit, is there a pattern? We start looking at the organization of parts. We're going to be breaking down articles, so we're going to start analyzing each part and analyzing, whether or not we should believe that, whether or not it has, some merit to it. We're also going to be looking at hidden meanings. So this is where you might be reading between the lines. And we're going to be identifying some different components. And so when we're reading for analysis, I want to break this down. What that really means is we are breaking down a piece of text into its parts to better understanding. We're looking at how all of those different parts work together and how they support each other. And as you examine these components, you're going to start making inferences or reading between the line, interpreting what is the message that the author is really trying to send. And so questions we can use to guide us, I apologize for that, are who is the intended audience? So we're going to be really looking at who is the author writing to, and then what is the author's purpose? Why did they write this, and what do they hope to gain out of it? Okay, after analyzing, we are ready to evaluate. So evaluate, what this really is you are justifying a stand or a decision. You are judging. We're going to be judging the author's argument. And how we do this is we use this 3-step reading process where you're going to go through and you're going to look at the title, you're going to look at the year, the date that it was written, you're going to look at the authors, we're going to look for those ethos, whether or not they have the ethical background that we want to believe it, right? We're going to look through the article. As we read it, we're going to be making connections. We're going to be deciphering its parts. And then finally, we're going to make a judgment. Is this really a good argument? And so evaluating as we read, here's some different things that we're going to be looking at. So we need to look at the audience. Who is the author writing to? What is the purpose? And then what types of language? We just talked about, we will be talking about I think it's the video, Why Study Argument, we talk about language and why that's important. So you'll be watching that video this week as well. We're also looking, is the author effectively writing to their audience? Again, this is this ethos part. Then we'll look at the argument and the evidence. Does the evidence support the conclusions that are drawn? Did the author interpret the evidence correctly? Did the author really understand that evidence and how it worked? Did the author address a counter argument? Did the author address the complexity of the issue, the other side of the issue? Has the author made some assumptions, and are these assumptions unreasonable? And then also, has the author allowed bias to influence their work? We're going to talk a lot about bias in this class, and we'll talk about how bias is natural. We all have bias. We have a feeling one way or the other, but it's when we let this bias overshadow our ability to listen to others. is when it becomes a problem. So we need to really evaluate, did the author, put aside their biases enough to present a convincing case? And finally, the last stage of critical thinking is this whole idea of creating. I think we spend a lot of time in society arguing back and forth. I'm right, you're right, this is how it should be. But we never get to that next part, which is creating change, creating a difference if that is necessary. And so this is really where we're going to be at the end of this class. You are going to create a podcast that discusses these issues and is either a call to action, a call for change, or something like that. And so what creating is producing a new original work. You plan it, you generate it, you produce it. And here's some questions that you can be asking at this level. So what changes would help you solve the problem, or what changes would make the problem better? How could you improve it? What would happen if? Are there any alternatives that you can propose, or what could be done to maximize or minimize? And so that kind of concludes Bloom's taxonomy. So just kind of as a quick review, remember that there's 6 levels, but there's 2 components. We do have to move systematically up the taxonomy. We can't skip a level. For instance, if we skipped understanding and we didn't really understand the issue, we're going to be critically thinking about something we don't understand, and we're probably going to make mistakes. So, kind of remember, have you ever been listening to somebody argue and you're like, they have no idea what they're talking about? And that's probably because they didn't do all of those things in that lower level. So moving on, I want to go through a critical thinking exercise with you. So there will be a few times here where you have to stop and write some things down. But I want to talk to you a little bit about a case. It was Sultana Freeman versus the state of Florida. And Sultana Freeman is a Muslim woman that had a Florida's driver's license with a picture that covered her face. So you can kind of see what her license looked like. And so what I want you to do right now is I want you to think about what issues could occur if a person's driver's license doesn't depict that person's face. So if you're having trouble thinking of, some issues or some problems that might occur, I want you to think about the places where you use a driver's license or an identification, or asked to show identification. And I want you to think about maybe what would happen if the individual requesting to see your photo was unable to identify you. Okay, so moving forward, September 11th happened. And so, September 11th was when the United States was subjected to a terrorist attack. 2 planes hit the World Trade Centers, and then another plane hit the Pentagon. And after that, there was really a state of uncertainty with the people of the United States. We were really scared. We'd never believed anything like this could ever happen, and yet it's happening before our eyes. And so it was just a really scary time, and kind of left people with, some feelings of unease and, how can we prevent this from happening again? So moving on to November and December, Freeman did receive a letter. She actually received 2 letters demanding her to unveil for a new photo, or they were going to cancel or revoke her driver's license, even though it wasn't expiring. So what I want you to do now is I want you to brainstorm using a mind map. And I have, for those of you who aren't familiar with a mind map, I do have one, kind of an example of one here. And so this right here, whoops, I don't know why it's doing that. There we go. This right here is a mind map. So normally here you would put, the issue in the center. And then I want you to start thinking about, should she be allowed to wear a veil in her driver's license? Why or why not? So kind of put your reasons and then anything that you have to support that. So I want you to take a couple minutes, grab a scratch piece of paper, kind of make up this mind map, kind of pause the video, think about some different reasons, maybe even try to put yourself on the other side and think of reasons for that side. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit more information here. So Freeman, who was previously known as Sandra Keller, that was her name when she was born, she converted to Islam and started wearing a veil in 1997, and that's when she changed her name. So if you look at a timeline in 1997, in January she converted to Islam. In August she legally changes her name to Sultana. And then October she meets and marries Abdul Malik Freeman, and then obviously changed her name to Freeman when she got married to him. In December she obtained an Illinois driver's license wearing the face veil in the photo, and then began to regularly veil her face in public when she was working. And so I want you to just kind of look at this picture of her, and I want you to think about, does this new information kind of alter your opinion on what you wrote last time? Next, I'm going to throw in a little bit more information. So I'm kind of feeding you information slowly to give you time to kind of process what you're learning. So in 2003, in May, her trial does take place. So the Freeman versus the DMV in Orlando. During the trial, it emerged that she had already taken pictures of her uncovered face. And those had already been taken by government authorities in 1998. And so if you kind of move back and you look at this picture here, that is, her picture that was taken by the authorities. The reason it is a mugshot is because she and her husband took 3-year-old girls described by the hospital staff as wearing Muslim attire that were in their foster care to the hospital because of injuries. They did object to the examination of the girls, or having the girls removing their Muslim attire, because they believed that it would violate their religious beliefs. One of the girls had a broken arm, and both of the girls had numerous bruises and marks on their body. As a result, Freeman and her husband were arrested and convicted of aggravated battery, and both of them served an 18-month probation. Okay. In June 6th, the trial, ended, and the judge did rule against her and said, no, if you want a driver's license, you need to unveil. And so now what I want you to think about is, does this new information alter your opinion previously? And so, kind of to wrap this whole situation up, in August 7th of 2007, she still was stubborn, and she still wanted to win her cause of unveiling her face on her driver's license photo. She did eventually agree to submit to a photograph, but you can kind of see here in this picture, she did kind of mark her face up with henna to hide, some of her features. So it was kind of like, okay, you're going to make me unveil, but I'm going to still cover up part of my face. And so, again, I just want you to really think through this issue, and I want you to think about, the complexity of this issue. Is it really just about unveiling her face? Is it important for people to be able to identify us? What would happen if she got pulled over and she was veiled? Okay, so she's veiled, her driver's license has her face uncovered. What could happen then? I want you to think about what are other ways that we can use to identify people. I also want you to kind of think about COVID, and there was a time when we were flying and we had to be masked, and TSA would ask us to pull down our mask for a moment and then put it back up so that we were able to be identified. So I just want you to think about, this, and there's going to be a little discussion here that goes on about, the issue, and is it really just cut and dry, yes or no, or are there more complexities? And so to wrap up this video, what I want you to be thinking about is your critical thinking poster. So there is a video on that as well in the module, and that's going to kind of be your capstone assignment for this module. And so did anything we talked about in this video the review of scout versus soldier mindset, the connection between soldier and scout mindset to the Perry model, what you learned about Bloom's taxonomy. Is there anything that you want to add to your definition of critical thinking? You should be adding to that and changing it and things like that. So that is all I have for you today. I hope you are doing well. As always, please feel free to reach out to me if you need anything. I am here to support you. Have a great rest of your day.